about restorative justice. Dr. Whitaker was a member of the faculty at the School of Government from 1976, and then it became the Institute of Government, and I was there until 2012. He directed the MPA program in the UNC Political Science Department and championed its move into the Institute of Government. Dr. Whitaker wrote Local Government in North Carolina, and this was a primer that was widely used as a civics test in North Carolina public schools. He was also instrumental in the creation and development of the Civic Education Consortium. His areas of expertise included civic engagement, governmental work with nonprofits, and public administration. He earned his PhD from Indiana University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gordon Whitaker.
Thank you. It's very good to be with you. Let's see, I'll try to share my screen now and my PowerPoint. And here we are. So thank you. Thank you for that introduction.
Excuse me, one thing.
Sure.
Dr. Whitaker, we usually record our sessions. Is it all
We're
right?
going.
Sure, that's fine.
Great,
That's fine.
thank you.
Certainly. Okay, well, thank you for the invitation. It's very good to be with you. I'm always glad to talk about restorative justice. And in particular, I've been involved for several years now with a project in Durham called Restorative Justice Durham that works with the criminal justice system in Durham. Let me start out by contrasting two models of justice. The one we're familiar with is retributive justice. Retributive justice, it seeks to balance harm with harm, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. To make someone whole is to hurt the person who hurt them commensurately with the way they were hurt in this model. So the questions to be addressed are: who caused the harm? Who's the guilty party? And what penalty should that offender pay? And to represent this idea of retributive justice, we often use the scales so that whatever harm has been added to one side needs to be balanced by an added harm on the other side. When people talk about giving the victim justice, in this case, they usually mean punishing the person who hurt them. Restorative justice has a different model for what justice means. In restorative justice, the intention is to heal the harm. Instead of balancing harm with harm, the idea is to, as much as possible, ameliorate the harm that's been caused, and as appropriate and possible, actually build a relationship, strengthen a relationship, a positive relationship between the parties as appropriate. So the questions to be addressed in restorative justice are different from those in retributive justice. The first question is, what's happened? What's the event that we're concerned about? How was each party affected? And in fact, what we often learn, almost always learn, is that harm's been distributed much more widely than a single victim. In fact, very often the person who created the harm hurts him or herself in the harming process, or in the event that happened. So how was each party affected? And what harms occurred in that situation, in that interaction, and how can those harms be repaired. So the notion is to heal the harm and, if possible and appropriate, restore the relationship as much as possible. I want to play quickly a clip. I think I sent a link to this ahead of time, but for those who may not have seen it or to refresh your memory, let me play this this clip. With luck, I'll play it.
It's an unusual day in court when both the defense and the prosecution feel the outcome is good and just. That happened today in a historic plea deal in a Durham courtroom. Thank you for joining us. I'm Deborah Morgan.
And I'm David Crabtree. This story begins actually about a year ago. That's when James Barish was charged with accidentally shooting a 10-year-old girl as she slept in the apartment below his. Since then, the two families have been undergoing counseling and healing and a process called Restorative Justice. WRAL's Sarah Kruger was in court today and joins us now live. Sarah?
David, it was unlike any other court hearing I've been in. There were so many smiles and hugs and happy tears. Both sides agreed this is about a man who made a mistake but took responsibility.
Well done.
The mood in this courtroom was different. This triumphant feeling nearly a year in the making.
What I see in Mr. Barish is a man taking full responsibility, a man who made a mistake and owned it.
James Barish's mistake was accidentally firing his gun through his apartment floor, hitting 10-year-old Daisy Medina. He turned himself in to police before he was even a suspect.
After I found out there was a little girl involved, I turned myself in a grown man first. I don't have kids.
Now this case is making history, the first of its kind in North Carolina to be selected for a process called Restorative Justice. It focuses on healing through counseling and conversation.
The victims receive emotional healing by getting their questions answered, getting the information that they would like. The offender hopefully also receives emotional healing by taking responsibility.
It culminated with Barish meeting Medina and her family earlier this week without cameras, coordinated by the Religious Coalition for Nonviolent Durham and Campbell Law School's Restorative Justice Clinic.
There was a really beautiful, long embrace between James and Daisy.
And are you in fact guilty, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Barish is pleading guilty to 2 felony gun charges. He won't spend time in jail, but he will have unique tasks to complete while on probation, including speaking about gun safety.
I'm not even going to have a conversation about them having gun safety because I'm going to let them know they don't even need no gun.
The judge says justice can be an abstract term, but in this courtroom, everyone agrees that is what was achieved.
But on this morning, in this great city of ours, we know what it feels like.
And some people have reached out to me saying they feel that the punishment is too light. The district attorney told me that restorative justice does not grant a defendant anything that a regular plea deal could not. And in fact, he told me that restorative justice, that process is already underway in 2 other cases here in Durham. Daisy Medina and her family, by the way, were not able to make it to court today, but I'm told she is doing very well and is about to start middle school. David.
What an amazing ending to a story that could have ended so tragically. Sarah Kruger live in Durham. Thank you.
So we can talk more about that later, but let me tell you a little bit about how Restorative Justice Durham works. We get referrals from the Durham Criminal Justice Resource Center, all from the court. Typically, in non-felony cases, the charges haven't even been filed yet. And so the Durham Criminal Justice Resource Center is a pretrial diversion agency run by the county government that assists the court and that operates a number of diversion programs, one of which now is Restorative Justice Durham. So if the potential charge is a misdemeanor, it's likely to come through the Criminal Justice Resource Center before any charges even have been officially filed. Often that's at the recommendation from the arresting officer. Or it can come from the court after the charge has been filed. If the DA, if the district attorney recommends and the court agrees, the case can be referred to Restorative Justice Durham instead of being placed on the docket. So our work is mostly with cases that are potentially going to be adjudicated by the court, and this is an alternative way to handle that. We have done a few other cases, but that's the major source of our caseload. Participation is voluntary for all, which means that if someone is arrested, they may be given an opportunity to do restorative justice if they wish, as an alternative to going through the regular adversarial process with the state, but they can certainly withdraw at any time. It also means that the participation of the victim or victims is also voluntary. And in fact, many of the cases that we do are shoplifting because they're misdemeanor level charges, and they're the stores, especially big box stores, prefer not to waste their time on it. So if we can't have the victim actually participating directly, we use a surrogate, someone who has been there, been a store manager or a store loss prevention officer, who can talk about the harm that a commercial enterprise experiences from shoplifting, for example. The people who work in restorative justice, those of us who facilitate the process, are volunteers. And we all agree, everyone who participates agrees to abide by 4 core values: to respect everyone who's involved in the process, to act with integrity in the process, following through with commitments and so on, to take responsibility for what has happened and what will happen, and accept responsibility for one's own actions, and to deal honestly in the situation. Now, restorative justice is not an adversarial process, unlike the court, where the state is one party and the defendant is the other party, and anything that the defendant says can and will be used against him or her. Instead of that adversarial process, in restorative justice, it is a collaborative process. Everything that is said in the process is confidential. It cannot be taken to court. So if, for example, someone goes through restorative justice, they are not only allowed to admit their responsibility for what happened, but they're encouraged to take responsibility for what happened and to say it out loud. And whatever is said in those restorative justice proceedings, it cannot be subpoenaed. The court has agreed in Durham to make those privileged conversations, and so they are not admissible in evidence against someone should the facilitative should the restorative justice process break down, for example. So these are confidential, facilitated conversations led by trained volunteers. No attorneys are involved. Some of the volunteers are attorneys, but they're not acting as attorneys. They're not acting as advisors to a party. They're not representing anyone. In this restorative justice, there are no real representatives present. Everybody presents himself or herself and speaks for himself or herself, including the facilitators and any surrogates who come in to represent people who've been harmed, or any other parties who come in. Sometimes it's important to have community representatives because the harm has been to a broader community rather than to a single person or a small number of people. So how do we do this? How does it work? Well, we use a circle process to explore what happened, identify the harm, and then, or harms, there usually are multiple, in fact, and develop a repair agreement that the person who caused the harm agrees to carry out. And then we give that person an opportunity to fulfill that repair agreement, carry out whatever steps have been identified. In the case of James Barish in the video we just saw, the repair agreement included reimbursement of Daisy's medical expenses, the part that her family was responsible for beyond the insurance. I think it was something like $1,600. Also included, as you heard, a community service kind of component, and in his case, it was speaking to others about gun safety and about how guns can get you into trouble and hurt people. And also in his case, a gift during the discussions that we have in this circle process. James learned that Daisy likes to color and draw, and he decided that one thing he'd like to do for her to help her feel better was to buy her some art supplies, and so that was a part of his repair agreement. So was his sincere apology to Daisy and her mother, although that had already happened. And I'll talk a little bit more about preparing for the conference later on. I just want to give you an overview right now. After the particulars in the repair agreement, the particular actions specified there have been fulfilled, then we have a closing conference where the parties all get together. Everyone who was in the original conference circle gets together and talks about what's happened since. What kind of healing has there been? What kind of healing still needs to happen? What do people think now about where they want to go in the future? And so that is the sort of the end of the process. Let me say a little bit now about the circle process, because it's really a key part of this. we're all familiar with courtroom dramas, and so we know what that looks like. But the circle process is different. The circle process is based on indigenous people's conflict resolution models that have been used in many societies around the world over people trying to figure out how to work together to come together to resolve conflict and heal relationships. So in a circle, and typically we do this in a circle, although for the last year we've been doing it on a Zoom call like this, but everyone gets a chance to talk. And when we meet in the circle, we have what's called a talking piece or talking stick. The person who has the talking stick has the floor. And that talking stick will get passed around the circle so everyone gets a chance to talk. Only one person talks at a time. While one person has that talking stick, we honor the talking stick. And everyone listens to understand. We encourage everyone to think ahead of time about what they want to say before they start listening, so that the listening isn't taken up by me thinking what I'm going to say and how I'm going to respond to what somebody says, but actually hearing and taking in what that person is trying to communicate when she has the talking stick. Another guideline that we have, which relates to confidentiality, is that lessons can leave the circle, but stories cannot. So we don't talk about, unless somebody gives permission, as James and Daisy have done for this example we talked about, but we saw in the video. Unless everyone agrees, particular details can't leave the circle at all. Lessons can leave, but not details. And everyone follows those core values of respect, integrity, responsibility, and honesty. So that means that everyone is speaking for himself or herself, not speaking for anybody else. And as we go around the circle, we hear, first of all, what happened. And of course, the parties who were present tell us what happened. But the rest of us in the circle can ask questions. We can ask for details. We can ask for more elaboration. So the first question is, what happened? And we go around the circle with that, although, as I said, most of the information, all of the information really, comes from people who were present for the event. Now, to prepare for this, we've already met a small team of the 2 or 3 volunteers who are going to facilitate this circle conference, have already met with the person who caused the harm and the person who was harmed and other interested parties. If we're working with juveniles, we have to meet with a parent or guardian of a minor who's not legally responsible to act on his or her own, although in this circle, those minors do act on their own, but parents need to be present. Other support people sometimes. So we meet with people to explain this process to them, since it's a foreign process, an unknown process. And we also present these questions so that they can begin thinking ahead of time about how they want to answer these as we have the circle. After they have told us what happened, we ask, what were you thinking and feeling at the time? We want to help people explore what that experience meant to them, what was behind it, in the sense of motivating it, what were their thoughts and feelings, what were their reactions. What were you thinking and feeling at the time? Then, what have you thought and felt since? And this is where people often over the course of a circle or sometimes two circles, if we have to meet more than once, people talk about their remorse, their regret. They're being sorry for what happened. They're feeling responsible for what happened. They're taking responsibility for what happened. And again, as we go all the way around the circle, so those of us who are facilitating listen and ask questions and also can begin to say what we're thinking and feeling. Who's been affected and how? So on reflection, how did this affect people who were not directly there, for example? We often ask youthful participants, how do you think this affected your parents? Or did this affect your parents? And the parents are there so they can talk about that too. And then what harm did each of those people who was affected suffer? One of Daisy's big harms in the example we saw the clip of was that she was very frightened. I mean, could you imagine, here's this, 10 or 11-year-old girl, and a bullet comes through the ceiling and hits her. I mean, she was just incredibly frightened. And it took a while for her and her mother to agree to meet the man who fired the shot. But one of the big harms she had was that fear of a bedroom and of unexpected harm coming to her. And simply meeting James and hearing his immediate expressions of regret, because he began to feel differently about, he was scared when he first fired the gun and ran, but when he heard on the news the little girl been hurt, he immediately was remorseful and turned himself in. Anyway, so that helped Daisy overcome a lot of that harm simply by meeting him and hearing that he didn't intend to hurt her. It was an accident. So then what needs to be done to repair the harm as much as possible? And that's where the repair agreement comes. That's where things that, steps that can be taken to repair the agreement get fleshed out. So again, the process is participatory and voluntary in a non-adversarial way. We have core values that guide the process, and those are confidential conversations. We facilitate the conversations with all parties to the harming event, and we use a circle process that results in a repair agreement after the person who did the harm or the persons who did the harm have fulfilled the repair agreement. We have a closing conference where we take stock of where everyone is now and how they're moving forward. So in a nutshell, that's what we do at Restorative Justice Durham. As I said earlier, this is a program of the Religious Coalition for a Nonviolent Durham, and I've given their website here. It's easy. It's just nonviolentdurham.org. And Restorative Justice is one of the several programs that they offer. There are other restorative justice programs in the Triangle, one of which is the Restorative Justice Clinic operated by Campbell University Law School. And Professor John Powell is the director of that. He teaches at the law school there in Raleigh, and is also a consultant to us and works with us in Restorative Justice Durham as a mentor and guide. The Wake, Durham, and Chapel Hill Public Schools are all now using restorative justice in at least some settings with students. In some ways, this has replaced or augmented peer mediation, which was very popular in the schools for a while. I used to help train students for peer mediation, and I used to do mediation, and I think this circle process is much more powerful than standard mediations, in which the two parties still come together in a pretty adversarial setting, in my experience. There's also a restorative justice project at the Keenan Center for Ethics at Duke, involving Duke students. For many years, there's been a capital restorative justice project seeking to help people who lost loved ones to murder, to homicide, to heal their pain, and to help people who committed murder or killed other people to heal their pain. These projects, the Capital Restorative Justice Project works usually with two separate circles, circles of victims or those harmed, and circles of those who harmed them, rather than bringing those people together. Although there are some powerful cases of capital restorative justice actually bringing murderers together with the family of those they've killed. The Mediation Network of North Carolina, which has done peer mediation for a long time and provide mediation services for a long time, is also branching out into restorative justice in a number of places. So that's a lot. I think I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll have time for questions and answers. So what questions do you have?
I have one. It's Suzanne Botts.
Yes, Suzanne. Yes.
I'm familiar a little bit with the work that the Charlotte Mecklenburg justice system and the public schools have worked on for juvenile justice. I understand it's really successful in helping children not get into the school to prison pipeline. Have you had any experience with that, or could you comment?
Well, we have done cases where the schools, either the school resource officer, typically the school resource officer, becomes involved, at least at the high school level, and brings the situation to the attention of the courts, and that gets referred in some cases. I've worked on cases where a case arises in the school, theft or fighting or something, and the school resource officer is involved, and so it's written up as a criminal complaint. And instead of the student or students being referred to the juvenile justice court, instead of being charged with misdemeanors, those cases have been, in some cases, referred to restorative justice, and we do this process with them. So charges are never filed. There's no need to even expunge a record because there's no record. So if we can head them off soon enough, we do that, and it doesn't become a case of record, which is very different from a felony like the one that James had in the case we saw the news report. Felony charges have been filed, and the judge decided, along with the DA, to defer that. So he had to plead guilty in court. He's got a felony conviction on his record. He could now apply for expungement under some new legislation that's fairly recently passed, but that's different. Yeah, it works well with the kids if they can get diverting very well. That was probably more detail than you wanted. I'm sorry, I rambled.